very much, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here and sharing your experience and knowledge with our committee. I will begin with Mr. Warswick. So my first question, how does Canada's current immigration policy impact the labour market for young people? So particularly when it comes to those early entry jobs.
Well, if you define the immigration program broadly to include the temporary migration program, then as I argued in my opening statement, I do think that there are concerns that we have admitted a large numbers of temporary residents under different categories, including the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, International Mobility Program, and International Student Program, who all have, to differing degrees, the capacity to work for income. And so all these people typically are quite similar in age to young Canadians. And so it's reasonable to think that they're competing for similar types of jobs. Now, I'm not saying every temporary foreign worker competes directly with young Canadians, but I think there's a lot of overlap there. That's why I stressed in my comments about the international students, because I think international students tend to be near campus in cities where a lot of young Canadians are on average. And so I am concerned that, this is, putting downward pressure on wages, and in cases where the jobs are close to minimum wage, it may be creating youth unemployment.
Okay, so beyond the labour market, if we talk beyond the labour market, what broader impacts do you see stemming from the current immigration levels?
I mean, the labour market's the obvious place. I mean, I guess housing could be an issue. I don't consider myself an expert on housing economics, but, we need, whatever population growth we have, we need to have growth in dwellings to match that. And my sense is that hasn't kept up. Large population growth requires that our public health system expand proportionally, and I'm doubtful that that's happened. I've seen numbers to indicate that that hasn't happened. So those sort of what I would call regulated parts of the labour market be where I would be most concerned. I think you can expand economies with immigration. You can do it in a way that wages do not need to fall. It's not a guarantee. But if immigration or temporary migration is concentrated in particular segments of the labour market, you can see negative outcomes there, even if you're not seeing average effects. So it comes down to, in the labour market setting, are the immigrants or temporary migrants, are they substitutable in production with the people you're concerned about, in this case, younger Canadians?
Well, I know something that I have heard over and over so far in this committee is this isn't siloed. So it seems like the government, just through their questioning, is led to believe that our labour impact is siloed and not affecting these other facets. I mean, people need a house to live in. I mean, when you look at health, you need good health to be able to work. We also have mental health. So there's these wraparound services that also need to be available and accessible. And so I guess that's where my question's coming from. Like, how much of this is affecting these other areas that then, it doesn't matter if you are a temporary worker here, you're still having access to health services and et cetera, and so are Canadians, right? So how much of that is impacting other things and, and making the ripple effect?
Well, they must be connected. I haven't seen quantitative studies to say how important they are. But I think, what we're seeing with international students, what we saw is, a lot of people, many people living in small dwellings, right? And that, even if that, you say, well, that's the international students, they're choosing that perhaps out of necessity, that's still going to have an impact on that part of the housing market. I think for some temporary foreign workers, they probably alleviate healthcare shortages. Like I'm thinking of nurses' assistants, PSWs. But it's very hard to get doctors accredited in Canada if they're foreign trained. So it's very hard to see how, that part of the healthcare system isn't under strain because of the population growth. So, I don't think this isn't meant to be a negative statement about immigration. It's more that if you have high levels of immigration, you need to have all sectors of the economy growing, and highly regulated sectors haven't been growing. And also, I think that there's a temporary permanent issue that we tend to gloss over in Canada, and I think we should be looking at permanent immigration, because those workers will have more rights, they can move to whatever best job is for them, and that's what we did, prior to 2000, almost exclusively in Canada.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Last week, we announced a Conservative Youth Jobs Plan, and one of the pillars of it was fixing immigration. So, Professor Borswick, appreciate hearing your reflections on the immigration policy problems and their impact on youth unemployment. As part of our plan, we also recognized and highlighted some of the differentials between urban and rural areas by promising policies to make it easier for employers to attract employees into more remote areas with workforce housing. And I note in your testimony, you highlighted how immigration policies of the current government have exacerbated unemployment, in particular by bringing newer immigrants to urban centers, in many cases with already high levels of unemployment. And this shows particularly how there's been a misalignment between the immigration policies pursued by the government and the labor market needs. On this issue of the urban-rural distinction, what policy changes do you think could help unemployed people in areas of higher unemployment consider opportunities and take opportunities more easily in areas with lower unemployment, often rural or remote areas?
So you mean people within rural areas move to higher income areas or wage areas? Or,
people who are living in areas with high unemployment,
yep,
who might want to consider opportunities in regions of low unemployment because they're having trouble finding work where they are. What kinds of policies do you think can make it easier for people to take some of those opportunities?
I mean, obviously there could be informational barriers. People may not know about opportunities. I mean, it's costly to move, and there's a lot of risk. So there may be scope for government programs to support that type of thing. That could be expensive. So I mean, my view is I'm a little bit of a laissez-faire economist on a lot of these issues. I do support our social safety net. I think we do want to, as the other speakers say, help people up when they're down. But I think whenever we do a program to try to help people move or change, retrain, I think we should be doing pretty rigorous cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, I agree, and we're not proposing a sort of program to do that. What we're proposing is an incentive to make it easier for employers to attract folks. Can I ask about just kind of your analysis and your dialogue with the government around it? You've done a lot of analysis showing how a suite of immigration policies the government has pursued have contributed to higher youth unemployment. You've spoken and written a lot about this whole area. Does the government have its own analyses that contradicts your analysis? Did they come up with numbers previously to justify the previous policy that are different from your numbers? Or is your sense that they pursued these policies in the absence of that analysis?
I haven't had that kind of dialogue with the government, to be fair. So I haven't seen numbers that suggest this was, I mean, I think that these policies didn't have the negative consequences that I'm sort of arguing that they did. I mean, obviously the previous federal government did change direction on some of the policies, as was already noted, and I think I have interactions with researchers in IRCC, and I know the government's been concerned about getting the non-permanent population rate down from around 7.2%, if I remember correctly, to under 5%. I would say 5% is historically extremely high. So, we went from an even more extremely high level down.
Sorry,
to
my clock is ticking. I just want to understand. So have you seen an economic analysis done by them in advance of these policies, though? Is that publicly available? Have they shared it?
No, I have not.
No. Okay. Do you think they've done an economic analysis of this, or?
To my knowledge, not prior to the changes that we saw.
Okay. Just very quickly, you didn't mention the significant growth in inland asylum claimants.
Right.
Do you see that as contributing to the youth unemployment problem as well? People that often have to wait for years before their claims are adjudicated?
I haven't actually looked at that, but it's a candidate, certainly. Yeah, it's not an ideal situation. I tend to try to focus more on the economic programs, given my expertise, but obviously everyone needs to work or generate income. So it's
it has economic implications. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to present to the committee and answer any questions that you may have. So, as I see it, the recent increase in youth unemployment in Canada is concerning and is likely due to, one, the recent weakening of the Canadian economy in response to the U.S. tariffs imposed and the threats of new ones, and two, the recent rapid expansion of the Canadian population, driven mainly by an unprecedented increase in the temporary resident population of younger individuals. One way to think about this, using sort of basic economic supply and demand arguments, the labour supply curve of the lower wage service sector of the Canadian economy shifted out dramatically just prior to the labour demand curve shifting in due to weakening of aggregate demand in Canada. These two effects should each lower wages for this segment of the labour market, and given that these workers are close to the minimum wage, either effect could lead to higher youth unemployment. It is difficult to know how to attribute weight or importance to each of these potential causes. However, the second cause is no doubt important, and certainly the flow of temporary residents in and out of the country is within the federal government's control, so I will focus my comments on this policy area. The expansion of the temporary resident population was due mainly to growth in three subcomponents: A, the temporary foreign worker program, B, the international mobility program, and C, the international student population. I've taken some comments from a recent Globe and Mail opinion piece that I wrote on this topic. In response to the original temporary foreign worker program controversy under the Harper government, Pierre Brochu, Till Gross, and I explored the labour market implications of this program in a 2020 article in the Canadian Journal of Economics. In our model, workers exert higher work intensity, resulting in higher productivity, in situations where the wage paid is higher than their next best alternative. For Canadian citizens and permanent residents, the alternative to a Canadian job is likely another job in Canada with a similar wage. In contrast, a temporary foreign worker may much prefer the job in Canada to what they would have in their home country, since a temporary foreign worker is not allowed to move to another job in Canada normally. Consequently, a temporary foreign worker will have higher work intensity and may be prepared to tolerate illegal activities by their employer, such as unsafe work conditions and holding back part of their wages. The TFW program can not only slow wage growth, but may actually cause wages to fall. Employers should anticipate the higher work intensity of temporary foreign workers and offer a lower wage when initially advertising the job to Canadians, because failing to fill the position means they can hire a temporary foreign worker, yielding higher expected profits for the firm. International mobility program and international student programs have similar issues, and so the surge in numbers of all three programs are likely to have hurt the employment prospects of younger Canadians. In contrast, permanent immigration programs do not have these issues, as the rights of permanent immigrants are nearly identical to those of Canadian citizens. Consequently, the Canadian labour market can be expanded through permanent immigration rather than temporary foreign workers. So curtailing or even eliminating the TFW program need not limit the number of foreigners being welcomed to Canada. International students working off campus may be a greater threat to youth employment prospects than temporary foreign workers. The surge in the past 5 years in international student numbers, especially at the college level in Ontario, coupled with relaxed rules on numbers of hours worked, has greatly expanded supply of lower wage service sector workers. Canada needs to go back to stronger restrictions on hours of work off campus to limit the extent to which international students compete with lower wage young workers. International student numbers need to be monitored more closely and ideally limited to post-secondary programs leading to higher earnings, or leading to earnings above the Canadian average after graduation, as these individuals are strong candidates for permanent residency as economic immigrants. We should also consider eliminating the temporary foreign worker program, especially in areas where these workers compete with younger Canadians. It could be replaced with higher permanent immigration. We should also look at the international mobility program to see if there may be components of this suite of visas which should be eliminated or capped. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Warswick.